as we go into a silent meditation practice, just being really, really kind with yourselves. And so we're here, and I'm going to guide us. I'll have the honor to guide us through a meditation. So you take care of yourselves. If you find yourself wanting to move in some way, or wanting to sing or cry, whatever arises, this is the practice invites us to be in the moment just as it is. And to see when we're pushing away that I don't, and then to hold that and to be kind to that. And to see the anger and see the rage. And so it's all the things, yeah. And so just remember that we're together, we're here together. All right. So yeah, I'll invite you to find a posture that feels alert and supportive. If your body is calling to lie down or anything, please do that. Please take care of this one precious body we have. First, invite us to, before closing your eyes, you can keep your eyes closed, but just a little exercise to look around your space that you're in, your physical space, and just in your mind name 5 objects. Just looking around. And then you'll identify maybe 4 sounds if that's available. And the sound of my voice could be one of them. So 5, 4, 3 things you can touch, and just touching them. And then 2 and 1, so smell and taste. Maybe there's something you can smell or taste. Okay. So we'll transition to a breathing practice. So the breath might not be available for all of us. Can be too activating. That's definitely something that can happen. So you can practice the practice we just did, or try to tune into your body and feel the touch sense again, but this time with whatever you're sitting on or lying on. And for all of us to feel that unconditional love from the earth. The earth that's been cultivated and loved and appreciated, and also exploited and harmed, but that we know that as we bring our intention to love and to receive the cradling from the earth, that we receive that without question, without criticism, because we are part of the earth. So if you can sense that, sense the cradling, the support of the earth beneath us, not judging us for whatever discomfort, whatever pain we're feeling, whatever joy. And then sensing that, and then the sense of our breath being connected to the earth. The earth breathes, and we can breathe with the earth. You might imagine your belly being like the globe of the earth, the container of the universe. That we are part of the universe, part of the earth. If it's available, allowing the breath to come into your belly. If it feels okay to exaggerate the breath in your belly, just let it expand and then contract a couple times. And I'll invite us into a breathing practice just to count our breath into 3 and out to 6. If it doesn't work, just let it go. Just come back to whatever you're using to bring you back, your body, your room, your breath. So if you'd like to inhale to the count of 1, 2, 3, and then exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Inhaling 1, 2, 3. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Inhaling 1, 2, 3. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you want to do that a few more times at your own pace, no right or wrong way. Just inviting a deepening of our breath into our belly. So it'd be like 2 more cycles of that breath. And allow your breath to return to its spontaneous nature. And we'll be in relative silence. We can't stop the sounds outside, the sounds of our thoughts, the visuals. Just allow yourself to come back, the cradling of the earth, your breath, whatever other practice you might have that you're connecting to in this moment. But feeling a sense of the courage it takes to be doing this practice in a time of so much change. Connecting to our breath, to our body, to the earth. So if you'd like to bring a hand to your heart or to your belly, just connect to the tenderness of your body, the tenderness of our bodies of this moment. Just for these last couple of minutes, I'll invite us into loving kindness practice. So drop into your phrases if you already have them as you wish. Simple yet powerful practice of wishing ourselves well, safe. May we be safe and protected, free from inner and outer harm. May we be safe. May we be happy. May we live in peace and ease. May we be free. May we be safe. May we be happy. May we be healthy. May we be free. Gently coming back to your body, and if you'd like to bow, just thanking yourself for being here, thanking each other. Thank you for your practice. Just invite you to take care of yourselves, and I'll just jump in right to offering the Dharma talk for this evening. And just as we hopefully gently come out of this meditation, I want to remind us of, or invite you to consider that you are all healers. The title of this talk is Potions for the Poisons, Healing Our Hearts in These Times. I want to invite us to remember that we each have this capacity for brewing potions that can heal the world's wounds, knowing we're not separate from the world. Healer can be a heavy term. It is a big responsibility, and I just want to acknowledge and remind you that each of you come from a long line of healers by virtue of surviving lots of pain and suffering while still creating and still living, still thriving with joy and grace. That there are healers, reminding ourselves that there are healers in our line, that we come from a long ancestral line, and we just have to look back to our mother, who is just enough emotional, physical, psychological, material resource to grow us and birth us. Right? The folks in our line, there is designated folks that were healers. And right now, as we meditated together, and that call that you answered, that's the call to healing. So that's your call for inner healing. That's our call for collective healing. So infinite amount of causes and conditions that have created this moment. So we are co-creators and co-conspirators, cooks in the kitchen of our homes, our communities, our world. Buddhism as a philosophy provides a time-tested set of guidelines and techniques to end suffering and to end the causes of suffering. Teachings passed on like our grandmothers passed on their recipes for stews or home remedies for boo-boos, for bruised knees. So I want to focus this talk on the internal healing that we're capable of, that we've been doing, that we get to do, and how the Buddha Dharma, 2,600 years, has come down to us, instructions, recipes, held, tried, tinkered, coalesced, mingled to fine-tune ingredients that we all have in the cupboards of our minds and our hearts. The fruits as we practice in the meditation, and the minerals of the earth from the land that we cohabit. There are entrees to be enjoyed that have been enjoyed across generations, joining with and in the bending of the moral arc, as Dr. King spoke, the moral arc of the universe that stretches across and with all the wisdom of all the world's traditions, all the wisdom traditions that are coming together in this moment to remind us of the healing that's possible. Buddhism breaks down the causes of suffering, and the three poisons is an essential teaching to be aware of. It's said that all the world's problems originate from this trio of greed and hatred and delusion, also translated as attachment or aversion, ignorance. So this is the primary cause, these poisons, to keep sentient beings trapped in samsara, So samsara, a cycle of aimless drifting, wandering, kind of not knowing where we're going. And when we identify these poisons, that slows down and helps us get off this cycle of samsara. So these three poisons, sometimes called unwholesome states, the first of them is greed or attachment. So how does greed show up in our lives, and how does it generate and perpetuate these cycles of suffering? First of all, I want to take it out of like the individualistic, kind of reductionistic and blaming individuals, like you're not doing well because you're being greedy or feeling greedy, So it's not about that. But I do want to take it into the systemic and think about systemic oppression as the cause that stirs up these poisons, right? Globally, transhistorically, over generations. And we know that, right? We know that as marginalized communities, that we suffer the harshest impacts of these poisons, regardless of where these poisons exist in the system. And we need to be able to spot greed and attachment and recognize them. And let me be clear that it's not greedy to want and demand safety and healthcare and demand not being killed, demand not being exploited or dehumanized. It's not greedy to want equitable distribution of resources. It's not greedy to want to rest, to need, to want to grieve, to breathe. It's not greed to want to live. It's our natural impulse to want to attach, right? To want to feel good. And this poison, the teaching says that when the pendulum swings to the other end of wanting to feel good all the time, wanting more of it, that's where it turns into a poison, where we're avoiding unpleasant experiences at the cost of actually feeling the wholeness of life, to acknowledge the grief, to acknowledge the loneliness, the anger. And we have to acknowledge the poison of avoiding feeling those feelings. Right? And again, taking it out of the individualistic sort of blaming that a lot of the times we don't have the space to grieve. Right? That there's so much going on, and that it's easier, more compelling to sit in front of our social media feeds and actually reach out and connect to ourselves, to a loved one. So that's another form of greed, the strong desire, attachment to certainty. Like we look at our feeds. I know I look at my feed like it's checking the weather report, like somehow if I have enough information, then I'll be able to save the world. I'll turn out my unwoke uncle, or I'll magically solve racism, or I'll be anti-racist if I just have enough information, enough shares, enough likes, enough clapbacks, And it's both and. These tools, these apps, these are great ways to connect, but they're also greed and dopamine machines, feeding our greediness. And they're feeding off our time, right? They run on the fuel, the preciousness of this limited time that can't ever take it back time of our lives, of this one precious life that we have. I want to point out one more form of attachment is a hope for a specific outcome. Like a hope in general is a form of attachment. Musham is on this call with us right now, and I could blame it on her. She years ago taught us, that hope as a feeling is like beautiful, and it inspires. But hope as a sort of noun, like I want this to happen, I want this to happen, that is a form of attachment as well. And it attaches to hate and delusion, which are the second and third poisons. So the antidote to greed is generosity. So Buddhism contains a powerful philosophy around generosity, and it's called dana. I'll share a couple ways generosity is the antidote to greed. So we often think of generosity as giving away gifts, and the Buddha said that there are two kinds of gifts: a gift of material things and a gift of the dharma. Of the two, this is the quote from the Buddha, this is supreme, a gift of the dharma. So the dharma, the gift, is to share your truth. I know after 26 years of being in social justice and being a social worker and activism, that I've gone past my limits, lied to myself, taught myself that my life was worth, or internalized that my life was worth sacrificing. We know the term white savior complex, right? Or on the other side of things, the magical immigrant that works so tirelessly and can save their entire community. So basically the potion here, the antidote, is to practice the middle way. This is a central tenet in Buddhism. When you give, you make sure you give with yourself included. Generosity including yourself. How are you feeling? Does it bring you joy? Are you avoiding feeling the sorrows? Sometimes we give and give because it's too much to sit with our own unpleasant feelings. So every action you take ought to be rooted in what you know, in the Dharma, and what you know to be true. And the truth gets clouded, especially by the second poison, hate or ill will. And this I'll bring to the individual level, because it's so easy, we've been taught as folks of color to hate ourselves. Yeah. Sexism, ableism, all the isms, racism, right? And I think of this James Baldwin quote in his book, Notes of a Native Son, and he says that I imagine one of the reasons that people cling to their hate so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, that we'll be forced to deal with the pain. And we know we take this hate to the grave, right, sometimes. And I want to say that it's difficult, and that it requires to touch into the hate. It requires so much support to not be engulfed by the hate, not be engulfed by the rage, the fires of rage and hate. And as a psychotherapist, I have found in my work and in the deep refuge of Sangha that many experiences of hate and rage can be healed, can be metabolized in community. And that in the end, the antidote for hate, aversion, ill will is loving kindness. And how we bring compassion when we get stuck in the self-harm, in our addictions. And again, it comes back because the pain is too much. I want to show us a picture of, in Buddhism, there's the bodhisattva is a being that represents someone that commits to selfless service. And there is a misconception, especially in our culture, of like sacrificing ourselves. And the story goes that there's many manifestations of the bodhisattva. Avalokitesvara is one of them, and Kuan Yin is another. And that when we want to touch all the sufferings of the world, it takes 1,000 hands. And sometimes, I'm going to pull up this picture, the representation is that each hand has an eye in the palm, so that's how many eyes and arms and hands it takes to touch all the suffering of the world. And when we're in reality, in the truth, we know that we only have 2 hands. And one of the stories goes that the Bodhisattva blew up in 1,000 pieces because there is so much suffering in the world. And to update that story from 2,000 years ago to now, I think sometimes on our feeds we see literally thousands of images, and that we are being split and being inculcated with that way that systemic oppression works, of divide and conquering us. And I can't bring up the picture now, so you just, if you could just Google it, or but there's many representations of that, and so this obviously will bring up anger, right? It's a form of the second poison, but anger is essential. I see it as part of loving kindness, as giving us that energy, that fire to protect ourselves and our rights. We see it in nature that it's a necessary ingredient, like fire that busts open the seed of courage. Like redwoods, pine trees, they only bust open with intense heat. Yet we need our mindfulness concentration practice to help us express that anger in a strategic way, so that we're not blowing up in 1,000 pieces, burning ourselves up, burning up everyone around us. Indigenous folks practice controlled fire, so that's the metaphor that I connect to. How do we do controlled fires so that we're burning these poisons of greed, hatred, delusion? And we know that rooted in loving kindness, we're ready for anything. And so the third poison of delusion or confusion, the basic delusion that we have is that we're separate from nature, from the trees, from each other. And in that separateness, that what we do, this is a huge delusion that I personally relate to, and I think a lot of folks do, that what we do doesn't make a difference. This sort of, am I doing enough question that doesn't have an answer. It's not quantifiable. Bayo Akomolafe is one of my favorite thought leaders of our times, and he writes, "The times are urgent. Let us slow down." The times are urgent. Let us slow down. So when we slow down, we're able to touch into the antidote to delusion, which is wisdom. We touch into the wisdom that's inside of us. We're able to see that the traumatic symptoms that we're experiencing are not who we are. They're impermanent. They're not who we really are. That it takes community to clearly see through the traumas that we're not alone, that we're not the only ones going through what we're going through. And we have the wisdom, again, of this practice to lean on, to put our trust in. Of course, we see what works. This is an invitation in the practice. See what works. And really touch into the moment, because this moment is the only place where healing happens, where true happiness is found. It's only in this moment. Anxiety is never going to go away. Suffering is never going to go away. But our wisdom isn't going to go away either. The wisdom, again, that's been passed on by our ancestors. The messages, the whispers of how they survived arguably survived harder conditions than we are facing. So wisdom is remembering the gifts, reconnecting to the gifts that have been given to us, and to lovingly offer them up, giving them away. So I'll end with one quote from a beloved teacher, Larry Yang, to talk about loving kindness and how to practice and holding love and compassion toward all beings, including ourselves. And when he does his loving kindness practice, he has an ancillary, the side prayer that he's reciting, and I'll end this talk with this. May I be loving, open, and aware in this moment. If I cannot be loving, open, and aware in this moment, may I be kind. If I cannot be kind, may I be non-judgmental. If I cannot be non-judgmental, may I not cause harm. If I cannot not cause harm, may I cause the least harm possible. So, bow to you and to all of us, and just thank us again for making the time to come together. So I'm going to open it up to a couple of questions. And so, and if you give me a second, I'm actually going to open up. So before I open it to questions, and our POC coordinating Sangha members will moderate the questions, I want to bring up a couple images that I said I would bring up. And so one image is of a controlled fire, like I spoke about, and just as a metaphor for burning greed, hatred, and delusion in a controlled way. And then I want to show the picture of Avalokitesvara and Kuan Yin. There's many representations of these bodhisattvas, but just so you get the image of what it looks like to have 1,000 arms and 1,000 hands. And so this is one image, and if you look closely, you can see the eyes and the hands. And another picture of Kuan Yin. And so you can see maybe all the hands and the eyes. And I'm really happy to share that teaching. It came from Larry Yang. He was the first person to teach me that, and that just really helped me in a time of experiencing burnout and remembering that we only have 2 hands, 2 eyes, 2 ears, and of course 1 mouth, so that we listen more than we talk. Okay. So thank you for letting me share those. So it looks like there are some. So I said Larry Yang. Yeah, and I'll copy and paste his prayer in the chat box. So if folks, is there any questions about the 3 poisons and their antidotes? So you just put them in your chat box. And so we have a couple of questions about the paradox of the urgency of our times and slowing down. And it makes me think of a central teaching in Buddhism around dukkha and the general unsatisfactoriness of life, that there's always a level of suffering. And the approach of Buddhism is an updated term, harms reduction. So like I read at the Larry Zhang prayer, the last line is, if I cannot not cause harm, could I cause the least harm possible? But that as a last part of the prayer. And so that when we are practicing being loving and open and aware, that's what the world is calling for. Because these poisons are the roots of all the suffering. Right? The greed of not wanting to reconcile the collective and historical traumas. And there's a teacher, Resma Menachem, and he's another social worker, and many of you might know his book, My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. And he has a free e-course that he offers, and he talks about how to heal racialized trauma in the next 9 generations. And this is someone that I really trust and I think is really wise. And to think of the long game, right? To think of this life, of this call, of answering this call, first of all, as a deep responsibility, and that it's a call. Many of you have heard this metaphor of it being a marathon, and that at times we're sprinting, and that the healing happens when we are resting and digesting and being loving as much as we can, and then being kind, and then again, when we can be kind, trying to not be judgmental, and then if we can't do that and not judge the judgments, trying to cause the least harm possible. So to come back again to a harms reduction approach in a world, in an existence that will never get rid of harm. And then trying to get rid of harm is fuel for the poisons. It's a form of greed, right? It's a form of hating our karma, where karma is not something that is this logic of, oh, I did this, so this comes back. It's this complex web of causes and conditions that come together, and that is both can be violent and can be a miracle. And to put it in a binary, either everything's a miracle or nothing's a miracle. Right? And miracle, in the etymology of that word, is object of wonder. So can we bring this open, loving awareness as an object of wonder of how can I be loving in the face of suffering? And I come back to Audre Lorde saying, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And how we are put in positions where we are required to, that we're complicit in the harms. And so this framing of the 3 poisons is that it's a big responsibility to be healed, because then we are, actually answered your own question around not seeing it as a contradiction. It is helpful because we can then internalize the blame, right? When it's actually the system. And the seeming contradiction, is that we're part of the system and that we're creating the system all the time, and that we're influencing all the time. And so it is the complexity of life. I mentioned the word karma, and that is my understanding. The Buddha said that is a surefire way to go mad, that trying to figure out our karma the karma of the world is it's not. And this is a deep delusion we have, is this sort of, the fancy word is anthroport, I can't get it out right now, but centering humans as like the center of the universe. And so that's a delusion, and that the wisdom that we've been talking about is finding the connection, the interdependence, and creating love in the face of violence, and violence being a part of the natural world. And yeah, and cultivating wisdom, someone's asking, is healing pain. It's being with the contradictions, not getting caught up in the master's tools and using them against ourselves, each other, and healing pain. And healing pain is not obliterating the pain, because for those folks that if you deal with chronic pain, and we're all dealing with the chronic pain of systemic oppression, that so much of our mindfulness, if it's not there, it gets co-opted by systemic oppression, by dominator culture, and then we blame ourselves for the pain. And when we're able to be with the pain, breathe in to create space for the pain, breathe out and let it go, we can be with the pain and know it to be a part of a whole system of the joys and the sorrows of life. And when we're pushing ourselves to heal already, or it's like giving birth, I use the metaphor of our mothers, and that we can't force the birth to happen, because that can really damage us, damage the baby, the baby that's inside all of us. So that goes back to that Bayo Kamolafe quote, that the times are urgent. And to put it within a white supremacist cultural value, sense of urgency is a huge imperial white supremacist capitalist patriarchal notion, and to deconstruct that logic is healing. To forgive ourselves for being caught up in it is healing. To touch into the moments when we're not caught up in it, when we're enlightened, liberated, that is healing. And that happens at any moment. So as we're with the contradictions, we're sowing the seeds in every moment. This is the only life we got, you all, right? I didn't talk about that, the poison of hate, how much we hate our internalized hating our bodies, because for all the reasons, right? And that as we heal, as we appreciate our bodies, we're healing the world. That's how it is. In Buddhism, it's like holding smoldering manure or coal, and you're hoping the other person's gonna get harmed, or you throw it at them and it just kind of hits somebody who's getting burned. So the poisons, greed, hatred, delusion, the sense of not feeling enough, like you're enough. We're a really multi-ethnic group here, and one thing I've seen across a lot of our groups is that we feel like I'm not blank enough, I'm not Latinx enough, I'm not down enough, I'm not this enough, I'm not thin enough, I'm not white enough, all the things, right? So that sense of hate and greed and delusion those are the ways master's tools are manifest. So those are some of the things we need to be aware of. And you're saying decolonize the heart, body, mind. And yes, and colonization is a part of our existence now. That can lead to this magical thinking of like, oh, if I go into the past, that's where it was all perfect, right? And the reality is, it's being with the colonization that is now a part of our existence. In 2016, when 45 got elected, I saw all these stickers in the Bay Area: resist, resist, resist. We need to understand. We need to persist. Resisting, the pushing down, we need to do that. We need to compartmentalize. We need to be able to say, okay, not now. We need to hold things in boxes. That's just the way that our mind works, and it can be very, very helpful to say, not now. We put this aside. But the reality is that this is a part of our history, right? And the master's tools, divide and conquer. So hating on quote unquote white folks it's buying into, being used by the prying tools of the master to divide and conquer us, right? And again, there's no going back. Yes, the word mindfulness, sati is the Buddhist term, means remembering. And so what are you remembering, right? And it's the wholesome qualities, right? And remembering also the unwholesome, that's a part of the deal. That another white supremacist capitalist cultural value is perfectionism. And we've been sold that we're not perfect as we are. And then we can play with that. You're perfect just as you are, but you could use a little improvement. Social media often qualifies as the master's tools. So again, to go back to what I said, our most precious commodity is our life, our time, our life force. And what are you giving that to, right? Catching the not enough, the trying too hard, the being too much, but also knowing that the social meds, as comedian Phoebe Robinson says, she calls it the social meds, that they run on the fuel of our time. They're designed to keep us on all the time. And yes, that's another form of divide and conquer. Separating ourselves from our heart, our mind, our bodies, and then taking away time when we could be connecting, right? Because that's another thing we look at. We want to go and say, well, point out it's them, they're wrong. Like you do this, you do that. You just got to look in your own family, right? And be with that. And that's such a noble feat that it takes connection, enlightenment. The Buddha converted folks in their family to be meditators, and if you were to do just that, and it's not just adjust, that is really powerful. And we go outside of ourselves, and that's a form of greed and delusion, looking outside of ourselves, and because we can't handle the pain, just like that James Baldwin quote. Because we feel if we let go of that hate, we'll have to deal with the pain. And another master's tool is privilege. And privilege defined as the buffer between us and pain, suffering, and death. The buffer between, this is Rita Shimon in the Untraining program. She taught me this. And so that we get very comfortable in that. And it's not quantifiable. How do we leverage our privilege? But we tend to go to the other. And that's the biggest delusion. There is no other, right? There's no other planet. There's no other person. We're all in this together. Recommendations on how to reclaim pleasure in and with the body. I love Adrienne Marie Brown and her book, Pleasure Activism. Yeah, and then the James Baldwin quote, it comes from Notes of a Native Son. It's not from The Fire Next Time, but he was talking about his father dying on his deathbed. But so that's a great recommendation. And taking pleasure and loving our bodies it's a deep practice, and the world really needs it. Yeah. Um, yeah, and one of our EBMC teachers, Jesse, is saying, I think also feeling joy, remembering your inner child can be very healing, and being silly, for sure. Because the inner child, and this is, if folks haven't practiced loving kindness to your inner child, I highly, highly recommend it. Because our inner child isn't anywhere. Our 5-year-old, where do they go? They didn't disappear. They're still a part of us, right? So that's holistic healing, right? That you don't have to go buy green juice or whatever diet culture, wellness, industrial complex thing that's being trying sold to us. It is right here. And it's in community. We need both. Yeah. I do have a silly thing that was lying around. So here's a silly thing. So maybe I'll keep this on for now. Thanks, Jesse. Um, okay. So yeah. So playing opens up our creativity, and I'll leave us with this last phrase that I've been attributed to me. It's been, but there's nothing new under the sun. Creativity, so play, fun, creativity, is the opposite of trauma. It's the opposite of the master's tools. Okay? When we use that creativity for connection and love, that's the opposite of violence, of trauma. So thank you very much, everybody.